Dinosaur, written by Stephen Llewelyn and performed by Chris Barrie. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell to keep up to date with the latest installments.
There were 5 ships in the fleet, all built specifically to carry the pods and materiel to Mars. Tim had read everything he could find about them, and now, standing before the new world, he could clearly appreciate her skeletal design. See how she and her sister ships carried their loads or pods, depending on the requirement, under their bellies for easy release and takeoff. The new world was the first of the fleet to be constructed, and she was Tim's favourite. He was overjoyed when he discovered she was to be his transport. He knew her specifications by heart. 550 metres bow to stern, she was as capable in atmosphere as she was in space, allowing total flexibility and utility. Yet despite her size, she carried a permanent crew complement of just 13. Best of all, the USS New World was under the command of Captain James Douglas, a man Tim very much hoped to meet. Seated on his bridge, Captain Douglas turned to his first officer. "Open the boarding ramps, Jill. Please supervise the arrivals." Commander Jill Baines acknowledged the order. "Let's hope they're better house-trained than the last lot." The captain's mouth twitched at the corners as he raised an eyebrow. "Book and cover, Jill, book and cover. Let's not judge." Baines saluted and left the bridge. She took her time as she strolled through the ship. This would be the last trip they would make to Mars and back for a while, unless some kind of disaster struck the colony. The New World's next assignment was transporting construction materials and equipment for the planned brand-new from-scratch Moon Citadel. The project carried the grandiose title of New Rome, but most of the British engineers involved called it Moonton Keynes, and the name had stuck. She was the first person ever to be born on the Moon, more specifically, Moonbase, New Florida, in 2071. Her family still lived there, so naturally, spaceflight was in her blood. With no reason to suppose that this launch would be any different from the many she had undertaken, she sighed contentedly, grateful to be staying with Captain Douglas and, if that were not enough, she would soon be able to spend some quality time with Mum and Dad too. Her future looked exciting and positive as she entered the embarkation area of the life pod. The New World's 2-man security complement ushered people aboard, checking everyone over slowly and methodically. The Mars pod had its own security team, who were helping to expedite things, but they came largely under the jurisdiction of ship security for the extent of the voyage. Baines waited patiently until most of the 102 boarders were seated and strapping in for takeoff. Sergeant John Jackson called for the last few stragglers to get themselves situated. All of the ships had mixed nationality crews, as befitted a shared endeavour. However, both security operatives aboard the New World happened to be ex-British Army. The second was Private Dowie Jones, a Welshman from Gwynedd. Baines watched people drift almost subconsciously out of his way. Jones rarely spoke, but being the size of a brick shed, he rarely needed to. Jackson was already at full volume. "I am Sergeant John Jackson, known to my friends as the Sarge, and as you will all hope to keep my friendship," he added menacingly, "you may also call me Sarge." Baines' eyes twinkled with amusement. The Cockney bruiser enjoyed presenting all the charm of a scrapyard dog, but she was not fooled by the rough edges. He continued, "These are my 10 commandments. Heed them well. Number 1, you are free to move about all non-secured areas of the Mars pod as you will, but you will not for any reason set foot aboard the New World unless expressly ordered to do so by myself or a senior officer. Is that clear?" A disgruntled mumble chunted around the room. "Is that clear?" "Yes, Sarge." A more spirited response along with several giggles of embarrassment followed. "Number 2. Public areas, passageways and corridors will be kept unobstructed at all times, and no luggage, equipment or litter will be tolerated in these locations. How you people conduct yourselves when we dump you on Mars is up to you, but whilst your home is attached to my home, it will be a tidy home." This drew another murmur of mostly good-natured assent. Baines tuned out, having heard this speech many times over the last few years as they ferried people and plant to Mars. She chatted quietly with Mary Hutchins, purveyor of all things treat-related, standing next to her trolley of delights. "Is everyone clear on all that?" The Sarge barked loudly, wrapping up his barrage of do's and don'ts. Another, "Yes, Sarge," staggered through the assembly. "Any questions? No? Good." He closed suddenly. "I'll hand you over to Commander Baines for a few words." And without warning, she was on. The Sarge strode to the front of the room and stood to attention behind her, wearing just the ghost of a smirk. Said Baines, caught off guard. "Thank you, Sarge. Thank you very much," she added out of the corner of her mouth. The Sarge merely saluted smartly, still eyes front. "Hello, everyone," she continued. "After takeoff, some refreshments will be served by our local gal from sunny Florida, crewman Mary Hutchins here. She is the New World's janitor and cook and is therefore quite possibly the most indispensable member of our little crew." She gestured to Mary, who was bobbing about to the side, waving to any newcomers who caught her eye. There were a few polite chuckles as several people returned Mary's waves. "You will not find anyone more committed to the well-being of this ship or its passengers and crew," she added kindly. "Captain Douglas will be along to formally greet you all once we have broken orbit and laid in our course. He will also explain what you may expect when we jump through a wormhole. I don't believe any of our passengers have experienced this before, so I'm sure it'll be very exciting. But for now, I welcome you aboard the USS New World and look forward to getting to know all of you over the next 3 days of our voyage. Thank you." Once sure everyone and everything was safely stowed and secured, Commander Baines made her way back to the bridge in preparation for takeoff. "Well, what are they like?" asked Douglas as she slipped back into her seat. "Still cowering from the Sarge's 10 commandments, so it's too early to say for sure," she answered, strapping herself in. "Ah, good old Sarge," Douglas remarked as he activated the ship-wide PA. "Welcome aboard, everyone. This is Captain James Douglas speaking. Please make one final check that luggage is secured and all seat belts are fastened. We lift off in 3 minutes. Douglas out." Within the next minute, all crew reports came in green for launch, and at the appointed hour, the ship took off vertically with little drama, achieving orbit a few minutes later. Jim Miller was a senior member of the Mars mission staff, and this earned him a window seat for what promised to be an extraordinary view as they left the Earth behind. In his typical fashion, he gave up this remarkable privilege in favor of his daughter and the apple of his eye. 16-year-old Rose tucked a lock of blonde hair behind her ear and watched the airstrip recede as the New World climbed, blurring the details into minutiae. Once within the cloud layer, there was little to see for a few moments until the New World burst, Pegasus-like, through the top of the clouds into perfect azure nothingness, lit by brilliant sunlight. There was very little Earth left, just the vaporous envelope above, which allowed everything to work, and above that, the deepening void. Rose hunkered down in her seat, reliving all the attention she had so recently received as a Mars colonist. The massive publicity which naturally whirled around the first pod mission to the New World had gradually petered away for subsequent departures. She had been too young to remember the early launches, but to offer perspective, her father had pointed out that it is often more advantageous to be last than second. He was always telling her things like that, but as it turned out, he had been right. The media frenzy had indeed fully revived and redoubled for the last pod of the initial wave to depart for Mars, the very pod in which Rose now sat, holding her father's hand and looking out at the first stars pricking through the blue. It was all so beautiful. Exciting, too. So why did she have this persistent, nagging doubt? Her parents had had a blistering argument about the Mars mission a few weeks ago. Her mother, Lara, had won. She hadn't been privy to their second conversation, the pivotal moment where Lara had changed her mind and made up theirs for them, sealing all their fates. Rarely do teenagers consider what their parents have to do out in the world while they are in school. a necessary safety mechanism, allowing them one last hurrah before their turn comes. Rose had simply believed the subject closed until her last day in lower secondary education, where it became apparent that she had been mistaken. Leaving school is normally a wrench, a sea change in any young person's life, but Rose had barely noticed it amidst the uproar. Much more than her last day of school, it had been the day where she glimpsed her future, just moments before it hit the headlines. And now she was on a spaceship travelling to another world. Out of her window, the blue sky above gave her a feeling of ever-increasing depth. It was strangely like looking down into a perfectly clear, fathomless lake. Within moments, the new world made the transition to space, and with the last wisps of atmosphere behind them, their ride went from smooth to serene. Passengers began unbuckling their safety harnesses and mingling once more. Lara left her seat without a word and began prowling among the other colonists. Probably checking out what they're worth, Rose thought uncharitably. She kept her father's hand, preventing him from leaving his seat to follow her. Dad? Yes, sweetheart? Did you know that Mum forgot to tell me she'd changed her mind about leaving for Mars? Eh? Jim was clearly, honestly shocked. But I left you a message. You know, when I had to leave to be processed by NASA. Uh-huh. She forgot to pass it on. And with all her pressing concerns like shopping and ordering new outfits for us, she forgot she'd forgot. You know she always deletes everything from the house computer so it doesn't get too complicated for her. I actually found out when I arrived at school for my last day and was mobbed by the press. Wow, I'm really sorry, darling. When I didn't hear from you, I just thought you were on board with all this and simply busy preparing, Jim answered quietly, looking perplexed. Don't worry, Dad. Rose squeezed his hand. It is exciting, and we're here now, so let's just see. How did you change Mum's mind to let us join this mission anyway? She added tactfully, despite knowing who had really made the decision. Well, I didn't exactly. Later, on the evening I told you both about all this, your mum went out with... Barbara? And her friend Barbara told Lara she'd be famous? Jim looked surprised. I'm not sure it was exactly like that, but how did you know? Because she believes everything Barbara tells her. For God's sake, Dad, Barbara spends even more on shoes than Lara does. Rose rarely thought of her mother as Mum. Of course she takes her opinions as gospel. Jim did his best to look disapproving. Please don't call Mum by her Christian name. When Lara got together with Barbara, it rarely worked out well for Jim. He lapsed into a brooding silence for a while, wondering whether Mars would be far enough to escape the reach of Barbara's influence. He hoped his family would make new friends now, good friends, or at least ones who would have a less deleterious effect on his marriage. With the Millers' attention firmly focused on their future, the enormity of Lara's change of heart and what it would mean for their family was obscured. A happy accident of linear time, with the result held back to be produced suddenly from the bottom of the deck when they least expected it. Rose was watching her mother move among the passengers, a predator in heels and bling, when a nebulous feeling of dread descended upon her. At that moment she would have given anything to know the future, even if that divination showed that the future would soon be the very least of her problems. This whole affair had made her nervous when it was her father's idea, but now Lara had signed off on it, she feared disaster. Stealing a furtive glance up at Jim as they sat quietly together, she was pleased to see his face light up. As he caught his first view of space, the schoolboy glint in his eye, always at odds with the perfect suits and perfect haircuts Lara chose for him, sparkled to life. Poor Dad, she thought. The man who has everything but chose the trophy wife from hell. Do you think this new life will change us? The thought surprised her, and she gave it voice without censor. Dad? Jim, startled out of his trance, looked down at his daughter. Where did that come from? He asked, eyes full of amusement and the love he held for her. If it does, I say let it change us for the better, eh? His expression became more serious. Look, sweetheart, there's something I've been meaning to tell you. It's the main reason I accepted this position, actually. Rose listened, piqued. When the terraforming is complete, all the people involved in the project will be granted prime real estate on Mars. We're talking ocean views and eventually fresh air and wonderful wildlife, a lifestyle we can't even dream about on Earth anymore. I'll probably be knocking on a bit by then, but I want this future for you, and if you decide to have a family of your own, for them too. It may take time, but if there's one thing I want to give you, darling, this is it. A true future of health and happiness. Jim paused for a moment. I love you, he added seriously. Douglas sat comfortably in his captain's chair and relished the view unfolding before him through the forward viewports. No matter how many times he saw it, the sudden explosion of light and colour that was the Milky Way always took his breath away. Second Officer and Helmsman Lieutenant Sandeep Singh laid in a course to Mars and activated the autopilot. Like Captain Douglas, he too was an Air Force man. Before joining NASA and the Mars fleet 6 years earlier, he had served 8 years in the Indian military, a serious power in the latter half of the 21st century, as India rose to dominance as the second richest nation on Earth, locked in a cold war with China over resources. Course calculated and laid in, Captain. Autopilot engaged, he said, turning to Douglas. Thank you, Lieutenant. Good to see that Cambridge education wasn't wasted. Certainly wasn't, Captain. That's where I perfected my awesome fast bowl. Aye, I know. I saw you take 3 wickets in that friendly a few months ago. You're welcome to join me for a game in my holograph room, Captain. I wouldn't stand a chance, Sandy. Now, maybe if you programmed a nice links course with a sea view, I could get behind that. You know I struggle with golf, Captain. I just can't get the hang of the bat. Douglas chuckled. Singh turned back to his readouts. We will reach our cruising speed of 50,000 kilometers per hour in a little over 2 minutes, and reach our 1,800,000 kilometer minimum safe distance from Earth in approximately 36 hours, sir. Douglas nodded. Very good, Lieutenant. Right, I suppose I'd better go and meet our guests. Commander Baines looked up from her console. Enjoy yourself, Captain. We'll be here, glued to the monitors for the next 36 hours if you need us. Okay, Commander, you have the bridge, he replied. I'll try not to wake you up when I get back. Singh chuckled and watched the captain leave before returning to his calculations. He always rechecked them one last time before fully handing over to the computer. Once satisfied, his mind drifted back to his NASA accommodation, the place he was calling home for a while, and his cat. Her name was Fang, and he wondered whether he should have let her out, but it was a hellhole outside. It was always the same when he had to leave her. At least this was only a short mission, nothing to worry about. And yet he always did. Leaving the automatic cat food dispenser set for 3 days, he simply accepted that upon his homecoming the litter tray might hum a little. He lived in fear of a delayed return. If he let her out and the mission dragged, he might lose her. If he kept her in, she might make a mess or run out of food. He sighed. The agonies of the cat father. Do you think the captain might let me bring Fang on board, Commander? He asked. Commander? Baines had disappeared stealthily into the small galley off the bridge. He could hear the coffee machine. Singh sighed again and returned to his worrying. Post-takeoff checks complete, the ship, her crew and passengers settled into the quiet wait of space travel, the hours drifting by. Just one man's heart pounded as he made his way to the forward bank of escape pods. Now they were underway. Security would be lax until they were on final approach to Mars. This created an ideal opportunity for the saboteur. He lifted a floor plate in front of the entrance hatch to Lifeboat 1 and very carefully extracted a component. Once removed, it would render the escape capsule effectively useless, but it would provide him with all the power he needed. I'm hiding again, Henry Hank Bernstein Jr. muttered to himself, fuming. The walls and door were a bleak utilitarian grey, every surface so very wipeable. His nerves were frayed indeed, if the cleanability of the walls was upsetting him too. He waited stolidly for his tummy to settle, and for his bowels to perform to the accompaniment of plumbing. The young man raked his fingers through his hair in agitation. Less than 2 days ago, he had been all fired up for a skiing holiday at the new $1 million a day resort near the top of Mount Everest. Now he was flying through the stars in a giant tin can whilst hiding in the can. As soon as the new world broke orbit, Hank had jumped out of his seat to get away from his father. It was not like there was anything to see. Hank Bernstein Sr. had taken the window seat as his right. Offering it to anyone else would simply never have occurred to him. Now Hank Jr.'s cubicle rang with the gentle splosh of solitude as he sat in the last remnant of every man's castle, barely surviving in the reduced circumstances of an overpopulated world. At least the gates were barred. If only he had something to read. He clenched his fists. Unfortunately, his stomach, which was only ever a problem when his father was around, did likewise. Memories of his life ending and a very uncertain new one beginning resurfaced. The day before yesterday, he had been completely oblivious to this new future on Mars. Recently turned 18, he had left his school for the last time, fully expecting to be drummed into a position within his father's multi-trillion-dollar corporation which sold something or other, toot sweet, whether he wanted it or not. But what actually happened had shaken him to the core. He had tried to get his mother to take a stand, but as always, there was no help there. He guessed she had lived in fear of his father and his lawyers for so long that she had no fight left. "There's nothing I can do, son, nothing but be here," she had said. "And I promise I will always be here. You and Clarissa are my reason, Hank, and I will never leave you or your sister alone, whatever happens to me." The brave smile for her boy's benefit caused a tear to escape down her cheek and broke Hank's heart. His father had paid every trainer and teacher he ever had to drill him with the knowledge that he would achieve something important and should be proud he belonged to the greatest nation on Earth. Grudgingly, he had to admit that without the US space program, humanity might simply be looking at its end in pretty short order. This much was true. He was proud of his country. They had achieved so much, but men like his father made him wonder if they had a future. The world's population, almost 50 billion now, was many, many times more than the planet could sustain, he knew. Virtually every problem human society faced stemmed from it. He had read somewhere that the net population growth was close to 250,000 people a day a century ago. It was simply outrageous now, and the world could not cope. Men like Bernstein Sr. had always seen this as a fantastic opportunity for profit. Of course, that was before he had jumped onto the saving the planet bandwagon. Now his father kept repeating over and over again, "The Mars mission is the last and best chance to preserve our civilization, and God bless the US of A." Hank could hear the booming voice ringing in his ears even now, nuancing the death knell for his own plans. He knew it was all hot air from a buffalo's backside. His father would only permit God to bless America if he had blessed Bernstein Sr.'s bank accounts first. There was clearly money in this Mars venture, and it looked like their lives on Earth were being offered in sacrifice to balance the payment. Hank's anger subsided a little, causing him to realize that he had been finished for a while now, so he flushed and washed his hands. Splashing water onto his face, he looked with bloodshot eyes at someone he hardly knew in the mirror, had never been allowed to know. "One day," he promised the stranger. A single tear brimmed, but did not fall. He wiped it with a finger. It was like saying goodbye to boyhood. However, some lessons can never be completely unlearned, so he washed his face thoroughly for the sake of appearances. It was time to lower the drawbridge and rejoin the world, or at least the new world. He had heard there was a bar somewhere aboard this crate. Maybe there would be a pool table or something.
Dinosaur, written by Stephen Llewelyn and performed by Chris Barrie. New installments uploaded each week. Subscribe for more. Visit the link in the description for free New World companion stories, available for download as ebooks.